I'll never forget the first time I felt something shift. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't some loud confrontation. It was the smallest of things that cracked open something I'd never imagined would break. But when I look back now, I see it all clearly, the signs, the moments, the way everything just didn't add up. Linda and I had been married for 17 years. We'd built a life together. I'm a retired engineer, and for the last few years, I've spent my time tinkering with projects around the house, making sure everything runs smoothly. I'm a man of routine. I like things predictable. Linda, though, she was more outgoing. She had her social circles, friends, clubs, and all that. I never thought much of it. It wasn't like I needed to know everything she did. That's the kind of marriage I believed in. Space, respect, and trust. I thought we had that. I thought we had everything. But that was before things started to feel wrong. Let me tell you something, I'm not the type of guy who gets rattled. I don't jump to conclusions, and I don't get caught up in petty suspicions. I've been around long enough to know that most of the time, the little things you notice don't amount to much. But there are some moments in life where your gut tells you that things aren't as they seem. And when you ignore that feeling, you're only setting yourself up for disaster. Trust me, I learned that the hard way. It all started with a ticket. Just a stupid concert ticket. I was cleaning out an old drawer, the one where all the receipts, old papers, and random junk pile up over the years. I hadn't even been looking for anything in particular, just trying to clear out the clutter. Then, I found a ticket to something called Jazz Nights at the Blue Oak. Now listen, I'm not a jazz fan. Neither is Linda. Sure, she likes music, but jazz? That was never her thing. So when I found that ticket, I thought, this is strange. But I didn't think much of it at first. People forget plans. Maybe she'd bought it for some reason I didn't know about. Maybe it was just a mistake. But then I saw the date. It was for the night before last. A date I could have sworn Linda had never mentioned to me. And when I looked at the ticket again, I realized something. She hadn't even mentioned this concert. Not once. Linda always tells me when she's got something planned. Even if it's something as simple as dinner with her friends or a weekend trip with her sisters, she'd tell me. But this was the first I'd heard of it. I could feel my pulse quicken. That ticket didn't sit right with me. It felt like the first crack in a foundation I thought was solid. I shoved it into my pocket and waited for her to come home. Linda was supposed to be at her book club meeting that evening, but I knew I wasn't going to just sit there and wait like some fool. I had to know what was going on. She'd always been open with me, so why this ticket? Why had she been so casual about it? I wasn't going to make a scene. Not yet, but I was going to keep my eyes open. When Linda came home later, she was her usual self, warm, affectionate. She kissed me on the cheek, set her things down, and smiled like everything was fine. But I could tell. You know that feeling you get when something's just off? It was there, crawling under my skin. How was the meeting? I asked, keeping my voice steady, casual. Oh, same old thing, she said, tossing her purse on the counter. Just a bunch of chatter. But then, just as she was about to walk toward the bedroom, she turned back to me with a half smile. Hey, I'm going to head to bed early tonight. Kind of tired, she said, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. Something about her tone didn't sit well with me. It was almost too rehearsed, like she was trying to brush me off quickly. But I didn't say anything. I wasn't going to push. Not yet. Anything interesting come up? I asked, though it felt like a meaningless question. I wanted her to talk. I needed her to talk. Oh, not really, she replied, shrugging. But I was talking to Janet about going to that jazz concert tomorrow night. You remember Blue Oak, right? You said you didn't want to go. I froze. What did she just say? I didn't say anything at first, just stared at her. Janet was one of her friends from college. Fine, she'd go to a concert with Janet. But here's the thing. Linda had never once mentioned any interest in jazz. Not once. Ever. She wasn't into it. And neither was Janet, for that matter. They were more into book clubs and wine tastings. Not jazz concerts. So why the hell was Linda suddenly going to one? I kept my cool, forced a smile. Well, I didn't know you were planning on going, I said. Who else is going? Oh, it's just going to be me and Janet. She really wants to go, so I figured I'd tag along. Nothing big. Nothing big? Her tone, something in it just didn't feel right. Too casual. Too quick. She was brushing it off like it was no big deal. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something. That damn ticket, it kept gnawing at me. But I didn't say anything. Not yet. If she wanted to lie, fine. Let her lie. I'd figure it out on my own. The next couple of days passed, and I started noticing more odd things. Small things, but enough to make me uneasy. She'd been going on these self-care weekends, these day-long seminars on personal development, yoga retreats, whatever you want to call them. It wasn't that I cared she was taking time for herself. Hell, I encouraged it. But she'd never gone on trips like this before. She'd always been the type to spend her weekends with me or with our friends. But now, every weekend, there was something new. A self-help retreat, a wellness seminar, a weekend away to clear her mind. She never asked me to join. Never mentioned it unless I asked. I wasn't invited into her world anymore. Then there were the walks. Linda had started taking these long, solitary walks in the evenings, sometimes after dinner, sometimes when I was busy with something else. She'd just slip out the door, telling me she needed to clear her head. I'd never once gotten an invite to join her. It wasn't like her. We used to take walks together. We used to talk, laugh, and enjoy the quiet evenings. But now, I was being shut out. Now, I'm not an idiot. When people start pulling away, when they stop sharing their life with you, you know something's wrong. I didn't need to be a detective to see the signs. But I wasn't going to jump to conclusions just yet. I wasn't going to act like some jealous fool. No, I was going to sit back and watch. Let her show her hand. It wasn't long before I found myself in the kitchen, fixing a late dinner, when I saw something that made my blood run cold. Linda's phone, sitting on the counter. Screen up. Now, let me tell you something about Linda's phone. She always keeps it close. It's like an extension of her body, never more than a few feet away. So why the hell was it sitting there, unattended, like some random piece of furniture? I walked over to it without thinking. And that's when I saw it, a message from a number I didn't recognize. Can't wait to see you tonight. My heart stopped. I didn't even need to read the rest. I knew what this was. This wasn't just some random text. This was proof. Proof of what I'd been suspecting for weeks. I didn't freak out. I didn't storm out of the house or start yelling. But I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let this go. I wasn't going to pretend I didn't see it. I wasn't going to sit around and let her walk all over me. I'd been patient. I'd been trusting. But trust can only go so far. Now, it was time to find out the truth. And I wasn't going to like what I found. But I was damn well going to find it. It's strange, you know? The way people can look at you for years and think they know you. Think they have you figured out. Linda had always seen me as the patient, calm, steady one. The guy who never got flustered, who didn't jump to conclusions. She thought I was a fool, I guess. But I wasn't. I knew the game, even if I wasn't playing it. I'd seen the signs. The ticket, the phone, the strange weekend getaways, the way she kept her phone glued to her side like a damned lifeline. I'd ignored my gut before, told myself it was nothing. But this time, something snapped. This time, I was going to find the truth whether I liked it or not. The first thing I did was wait. That's the hardest part, I think, waiting. You don't want to jump in and confront her too soon, not without solid proof. And I wasn't going to give her the chance to lie her way out of it. Not this time. I had my pride. The next day, I made a few calls. Nothing shady. Just simple, practical stuff. I called a few of Linda's friends. Janet, for one. It was a risk, but I had to know more about the concert. Maybe Janet knew something that could explain the ticket, the one she'd mentioned casually that night. "Hey, Janet. It's Greg," I said when she picked up. "How's it going?" "Oh, hey, Greg. Everything's good. What's up?" I tried to sound casual. "Not much. Just wanted to ask about that concert Linda mentioned. You two gonna see that jazz thing tomorrow night?" There was a slight hesitation on the line before Janet replied. "Oh, yeah. We were talking about it last week. It's a Blue Oak, you know. We've been talking about it for a while." "Linda didn't tell you?" I could feel my jaw tighten. "Linda didn't tell you?" That was a lie, and we both knew it. "No, I don't recall her mentioning it. She didn't tell me anything about it." "Oh, I guess she just forgot," Janet said a little too quickly. "She's been busy with work and all, you know." I held back a sigh. She was lying. I didn't need to be a detective to know that much. Janet wasn't convincing. I was going to need more than a conversation with a friend who was clearly in on the act. But it was a start. That night, I waited for Linda to come home. I had to make sure I wasn't missing anything, that I wasn't letting my emotions get the better of me. She came in late, looking tired but still trying to act normal, like nothing had changed. "Hey, honey," she greeted me, leaning in for a quick kiss. "How was your day?" "Good," I replied, nonchalantly. "Anything interesting at work?" "Same old," she said, shrugging. "Busy. You know how it is." But there was something in her voice, something forced, like she was trying too hard. I didn't press it. I didn't want to give her any reason to suspect I knew what was going on. But the next morning, I took it a step further. I had to check her phone. Now, I know what you're probably thinking. Some people would say it's wrong to snoop, but let's get real. When your wife is acting like she's hiding something, when she's keeping her phone close but won't let you near it, what else are you supposed to do? I wasn't about to let this slide. Not this time. I waited until she took a shower. I knew she would leave it on the counter. She always did. The phone was there, just sitting innocently face up. It only took a few seconds for my hands to tremble as I grabbed it, swiping it open. I didn't even need to look through all her messages. I knew what I was going to find. It didn't take long. Just a few texts stood out, but they were enough to confirm what I already suspected. The first one was from an unfamiliar number. It read, "Can't wait for tonight. I'm counting down the minutes. Love, Nick." The message wasn't even subtle. Nick? Who the hell was Nick? Linda had never mentioned anyone named Nick. Not once. There was no Nick in her life, at least none that I knew about. I stared at the screen, trying to hold back the rush of emotions that were swelling up inside me. I scrolled through the rest of the conversation, and my stomach twisted. The messages were more than friendly. There were dates, plans, and what looked like intimate conversations. The final message from Nick read, "I'll make sure this time is even better than last." You know what I mean? The air seemed to leave the room. My hands went cold, and my pulse picked up speed. It was undeniable. Linda wasn't just going to a jazz concert with her friend Janet. She was having an affair. I wasn't angry yet. No, not yet. I was calm, calculating, and that's when I knew what I had to do. I had to handle this like I'd handled everything else in my life, with precision, with strategy, with no emotions clouding my judgment. I wasn't going to rush this. I wasn't going to make a scene, but I was going to make sure she understood what it felt like to be caught. I wasn't about to let this go unanswered. I spent the next few days getting everything in order. I knew exactly what I had to do, and I knew that when the time came, it was going to hit her harder than anything else. Linda's behavior didn't change much after I found the texts. She kept acting like nothing was wrong. In fact, it almost seemed like she was testing me. She'd been acting more distant, but at the same time, trying harder to be sweet. I noticed she was doing little things like planning dinners, buying flowers, but I knew it was all just smoke and mirrors. One morning, I'd had enough. She was sitting at the kitchen table, sipping coffee, and I could feel the tension building inside me. I stood up, looked at her, and said, "We need to talk." Linda looked up from her coffee, her eyes flickering with confusion. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice sounding too casual. "I know about the affair," I said flatly, not giving her a chance to avoid it. "I know about Nick." Her face paled. She froze, as if she had no idea how to respond. And then, for the first time, I saw something I didn't expect: panic. "Greg, please," she started, her voice shaking. "It's not what you think. It's just, don't lie to me." I interrupted, my voice sharp. "I've seen the texts. I know everything." She opened her mouth, closed it again, then took a deep breath. Her defenses crumbled. "It's not just him. I've been unhappy. For a while now. Unhappy." I repeated, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. "With me? With us?" "I didn't mean to hurt you," she said, her eyes welling with tears. "But it's just, I don't know anymore. You've been distant. We've been distant for years." I didn't want to hear her excuses. I wasn't some naive fool who would let her talk her way out of this. But I knew I had to let her speak. I needed to hear it all. The lies, the justifications, everything. "I don't want to hear it," I said, cutting her off again. "You're not getting away with this. You're not going to talk your way out of it. Not this time." I could see the panic in her eyes now. She realized I wasn't going to forgive her. And I wasn't. I wasn't going to just let this slide and pretend everything was fine. Linda had broken something that couldn't be fixed with a few tears and some sweet words. I didn't need her anymore. I wasn't about to let her destroy my life and think she could waltz back in like nothing happened. The decision had already been made. She could beg all she wanted. She could cry, apologize, promise she'd change. But the truth was I was done. I was going to make her understand exactly what she'd done, and I was going to make sure she paid for it. And that's when the revenge plan started to take shape. After the initial revelation, the house was eerily quiet. Linda had tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy, but there was no pretending anymore. No more pretending that things were fine. We both knew what had happened, and we both knew the fallout was coming. I watched her carefully, trying to decipher every move, every word she said, every look she gave me. She was spinning the usual web of lies, offering me explanations, telling me that it was a mistake, that it didn't mean anything. But I wasn't buying it. For years, she'd been good at hiding things, at making me believe that everything was fine. But now the mask had slipped, and I saw her for what she really was. That evening, she sat across from me in the living room, her body language as defensive as I'd ever seen. She was wearing that same soft, guilt-ridden expression that I'd seen on her face during our worst arguments, when she knew she was losing the battle but wasn't ready to admit defeat. "Greg, please," she started again, her voice breaking. "You have to understand. I was confused. You weren't there for me. We were growing apart, and Nick, he was there. He listened to me. He made me feel alive again. I never meant to hurt you. I swear." I didn't say anything at first. I just stared at her, watching the tears fall. She was good at this. Too good. I'd seen it before, the act. The attempt to manipulate my emotions, to make me feel guilty for her actions. She wasn't the same woman I'd married. The one who once cared about our family, our future. No. Now she was someone else. Someone who'd found a way to justify everything, no matter how much damage it caused. "Linda, stop," I said sharply, cutting her off. "I've heard all your excuses. You think I'm some fool who will just forgive you because you feel sorry? Because you made a mistake? I'm not your punching bag." She flinched, but I wasn't done. "I know about Nick, and I know you've been lying to me for months. You think I haven't seen it? The late nights, the strange schedules, the sudden work trips that don't add up. I'm not an idiot. You thought you could sneak around behind my back and it wouldn't catch up to you? Well, it did." Her face paled as I spoke, her eyes darting nervously around the room. She had nowhere to hide now. I had the evidence, the truth was out in the open, and she was cornered. The game was over. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen," she whispered, her voice cracking. "It wasn't supposed to be like this. I thought we were happy, but I needed something more." "No, Linda," I said, leaning forward, my voice low and steady. "You didn't need something more. You just didn't care enough to fight for what we had. You threw it all away. You didn't even think twice before you threw me under the bus. And now I'm the one picking up the pieces." She sat there in silence for a long time, her head bowed, as if the weight of the situation was finally starting to hit her. But I could see it in her eyes. She wasn't truly sorry. She wasn't even close. The guilt was there, but it was overshadowed by a quiet resentment. She resented me for forcing her to face the consequences of her actions. "I don't want to talk about this anymore," Linda said, her voice stiff. "You're making it seem like I did something terrible. Maybe I did, but we were already falling apart before any of this happened. I don't know why you're acting like I'm the villain here." I leaned back in my chair and looked at her. Her defensiveness was more than just a reaction. It was an attempt to redirect the blame, to turn the tables and make me the bad guy. It was textbook manipulation, and I wasn't buying it. "You're damn right I'm making you face this," I said, my tone hardening. "You think you can run around, cheat, lie, and then expect me to just be okay with it? You want to blame me? Fine. Let's talk about your behavior, about your choices. I didn't ask you to cheat. I didn't push you into another man's arms. You did that all on your own." Her eyes flashed with something I hadn't seen before, genuine anger. But it wasn't directed at me, it was at herself. She knew what she'd done, and for the first time, she wasn't controlling the narrative anymore. I was. The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. Linda stood up abruptly, pacing back and forth. I could see the tension building inside her, the realization that the lie she'd been telling herself, telling everyone, was crumbling, piece by piece. "I don't know what you want me to say," she said, her voice rising. "What am I supposed to do? What am I supposed to do to make it right?" I stood up too, meeting her gaze with unflinching resolve. You can't make it right. You've broken this. There's no magic apology that's going to fix what you've done. Her eyes searched mine for any sign of forgiveness, but I gave her nothing. Nothing but the cold truth. I wasn't going to fall for her sob stories. I wasn't going to let her manipulate me into some false reconciliation. She had made her choice, and I wasn't going to play the part of the forgiving husband she so desperately wanted. And then something shifted. A flicker of realization crossed her face. She wasn't going to win me back with tears or pleas. The realization that she had lost me, for good, began to settle in, and I saw the panic set in. Her hands were shaking as she reached for her phone. She was trying to send a message, probably to Nick, to try and smooth things over. But I wasn't going to let her get away with it. Not now. You're not going anywhere, Linda, I said firmly. I'm done listening to your excuses. And you're not going to fix this with more lies. You can't just lie your way out of this. I had made up my mind. I wasn't just going to walk away from this quietly. I wasn't going to let her waltz away from the destruction she'd caused and go back to her life like nothing had happened. No, if she thought she could pull the wool over my eyes, she was dead wrong. I wasn't just going to hurt her emotionally. I was going to make her life as miserable as mine had been these past few months. These past few years, really. If she thought she could turn her back on me and walk away scot-free, she had another thing coming. Linda had cost me my dignity, my peace of mind, and possibly the future I had imagined. But I wasn't going to let that go unpunished. She'd broken my trust, but she was going to regret breaking it. I was going to make sure of that. Over the next few days, I began laying the groundwork for what I knew would be an inevitable fallout. I didn't rush into things. I let Linda think she still had some control over the situation. I let her believe, for a moment, that she could still manipulate me into forgiving her. But I was already steps ahead of her. I started making phone calls to a few people who might have some leverage in this situation, people who could help me make sure Linda felt the full weight of what she'd done. I reached out to some of her coworkers, discreetly, to see how Nick was regarded within her circle. I wasn't concerned with whether he was some powerful man or not. I just wanted to see how far this web of lies had stretched. And when I spoke to a few old family friends, I made sure they were aware of what had been going on. They'd always seen Linda as the charming, sweet woman until they saw the truth. She didn't know it yet, but the walls were closing in. I wasn't going to let her rebuild her reputation so easily. Linda had been trying to make amends since that night. The night we both knew was the tipping point. At first, she tried the usual tricks, acting as though nothing had happened, as if I was just being emotional. Then, when she realized that wasn't going to work, she went on the offense. She began pushing harder, trying to get me to agree to some form of reconciliation. But this wasn't just about saving the marriage anymore. I could see it now. This was about saving her. She was fighting not to lose everything. The house, her friends, her status as a good wife. But she wasn't going to be able to pull the wool over my eyes. Not anymore. Greg, she said one evening, sitting on the edge of the couch like she had something important to say. I know I messed up, but this thing with Nick, it's over. It was a mistake. I want us to get back to how we were, how we used to be. I'll do anything to fix this. I'll go to therapy. I'll cut him off. Just give me another chance. She was pleading now, but her words didn't resonate. There was no magic fix for what had been broken, no apology that could erase the years of dishonesty and betrayal. What she didn't understand was that her actions had already set things in motion, things that were beyond her control now. And I was beyond caring about her feelings. Her words were nothing but hollow promises meant to buy her way back into my good graces. I wasn't interested in hearing any more excuses or manipulations. What she didn't realize was that I had already begun my own plan. The first thing I did was secure my own position. I'd spent years building my reputation, both professionally and personally. I wasn't going to let Linda, or Nick for that matter, destroy that without consequences. I contacted my lawyer to make sure I had all my ducks in a row. I wasn't about to let her leave with half of everything after she'd shattered the foundation of our marriage. I knew there were going to be fights. There would be legal battles, and she would try to twist things in her favor. But I was ready. I had taken enough of the back seat in our marriage. Now it was my turn to take control. I started pulling all the strings I could to make sure Linda understood the full scope of the damage she'd done, not just to me, but to herself. One of the first things I did was let her friends know the truth. Linda had a tight-knit group of women she'd always confided in, a group that, until now, had been oblivious to her affair. I wasn't about to let her control the narrative any longer. They needed to know who their friend really was. I didn't go straight for the throat, but I made sure that each one of them would understand exactly what had been going on without me directly attacking her. I reached out to them individually, in subtle ways that left no room for doubt. At a dinner party, I casually mentioned the late nights she'd been having at work and how it was odd considering she'd told me she was too tired to do anything but stay in. I wasn't looking to be confrontational, but I was planting seeds. And the seeds grew fast. By the time Linda realized what had happened, it was too late. The whispers had started. The rumors were spreading. Her close friends started asking her pointed questions, the kind that made her uncomfortable. Some even began to distance themselves from her. It wasn't long before she was isolated. The very people she thought she could turn to for help now saw her for who she really was. Linda had been acting like everything was normal at her job, but I knew better. I knew the nature of her relationship with Nick, how they'd crossed that line, and how it had infected every corner of her life. It was time to expose it, and this time it wasn't just about me. It was about the professional reputation she had built and the career she'd worked so hard to maintain. I wasn't just going to drag her down emotionally. I was going to make sure her affair with Nick affected her career too. There were a few key people in her office that had access to information about Nick and his personal life. They didn't know about his relationship with Linda, but I made sure to fill in the gaps. I didn't want to get too obvious, so I did it with subtlety. I contacted a colleague of hers, a man who was often in the office after hours. He had always been a bit too curious about Linda's comings and goings, so I knew he would be interested in what I had to say. I told him about the affair in a matter-of-fact tone, providing him with just enough information to spark his interest without giving too much away. The whole point wasn't to get him involved directly, but to get the word to spread to the right people. Soon after, Linda started noticing her colleagues acting differently toward her. Little comments here and there, subtle changes in the way they looked at her. She was being watched now, and it didn't take long for whispers about her and Nick to make their way through the office. Linda wasn't just losing her friends. She was losing her professional standing. It didn't take long before Linda's attempts to fix things took on a more desperate tone. Every time she tried to salvage the situation, every time she tried to pretend that everything was fine, the walls closed in even tighter. And I let it happen. I watched it unfold with a calm detachment, enjoying the spectacle of it all. Linda's apology tours weren't working. Her phone calls to mutual friends and family, asking for intervention, were falling flat. It wasn't just me she'd betrayed. It was everyone around her. The people who had supported her for years were now seeing her for the manipulator she truly was. "Greg, you don't understand," she begged one evening, her voice quivering. "You have to believe me. I never wanted this to happen. You can't just destroy everything like this." I looked at her coldly. "You're the one who destroyed everything, not me." Her tears were no longer moving me. The guilt, the desperation, it didn't sway me. If anything, it fueled my determination. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about standing up for myself, for my dignity, for the years I'd spent being faithful and loyal. And now, Linda would understand the consequences of her actions. The final step in my plan was to make sure Linda was completely isolated. She had lost her friends, her professional standing, and now she would lose the most important thing of all, her social circle. I started pulling back from our mutual friends. I stopped engaging with people who had been close to us as a couple. I made sure they knew exactly why I was doing it. No one was going to side with Linda after everything that had happened. I didn't just want her to feel the sting of betrayal. I wanted her to realize the full weight of her actions. She couldn't just move on as if nothing had happened. She couldn't just sweep it all under the rug. Not with me. Not with the people we both knew. As the days passed, Linda's face grew more and more drawn. She was struggling, and I knew it was only a matter of time before she would crack. She had no more cards to play, no more tricks. I had taken everything she valued, and I was going to make sure she would never forget it. By the time Linda came to me, one last time, I knew it was over. She looked defeated, her shoulders slumped, her once vibrant confidence now reduced to a shadow of its former self. "Greg," she whispered, "I'm sorry. I didn't think it would get this bad. I didn't realize how much I'd hurt you. Please, I don't know what to do anymore. Can we just fix this? Can you give me a chance?" I didn't flinch. I didn't soften. "No, Linda, it's too late for that." I watched her walk out of the room, her footsteps heavy, knowing she had no one left to turn to. She had destroyed everything: her marriage, her friendships, her career, and her reputation. I had won, but it wasn't about winning. It was about making sure she understood that there are consequences for betrayal. I had made my peace with the decision, and I was watching it all unfold with a sense of cold satisfaction. Linda had made her bed, and now she was lying in it. But she still didn't understand the full gravity of what was happening. She had been in denial from the start, thinking that by playing nice, by begging for forgiveness, she could erase everything. What she didn't know was that I was beyond her reach. It was almost pathetic, watching her attempt to salvage what little she had left. A week after I'd made it clear that there was no going back, Linda began her barrage of final pleas. She reached out to her closest family members, her mother, her sister, and even my own sister-in-law, asking them to talk to me. "Please," she said in one of the conversations I overheard, "can you just talk to Greg? Tell him that I'm sorry, that I'll make it up to him. He doesn't have to throw everything away." I could hear the desperation in her voice. Her facade was crumbling faster than she could patch it together. What she didn't understand was that I had already made up my mind. I wasn't some naive fool who could be swayed by her crocodile tears. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about making sure she faced the consequences. I didn't respond to her, not at first. I simply let her wallow in her guilt, letting the weight of everything settle on her shoulders. Then I took it one step further. I knew that Linda, for all her mistakes, still cared deeply about what others thought of her. She had spent years cultivating an image of the perfect wife, the loyal partner. It wasn't just about her career or her friends anymore. I was going to make sure her public reputation was in ruins too. I chose to reveal her affair in the most public way I could think of. Our social circle, family, friends, co-workers, had already started to hear the whispers. Now it was time to ensure the truth became common knowledge. I scheduled a dinner at our house, invited a few close family members, some of her old friends. Linda didn't know the true purpose of the evening, but I had already set the stage. As soon as the dinner was in full swing, with everyone seated, drinks in hand, I casually brought up the topic of Linda's new friend. I did it in such a way that no one could ignore it. I looked Linda in the eyes, and with a steady calm, I said, "You know, I was thinking about how you've been spending so much time with Nick. It's funny. He's always at your work events, isn't he? And I was wondering if maybe you two were getting a little too cozy. After all, you've been a little distant lately." The room went silent. The kind of silence that said, "Oh." Linda froze. I saw the color drain from her face, but I didn't care. I wasn't doing this for shock value. I was doing it because it was time for the truth to be laid bare. I let the tension build, letting the words sink in. "You see," I continued, "I know all about what's been going on. I know about you and Nick. I know about the late nights and the secret texts, the hotel rooms, the dinners behind my back. I know. And now, so does everyone else." The faces around the table ranged from shocked to appalled, but Linda just sat there, blinking as though she couldn't quite process what I was saying. She opened her mouth to protest, to deny it, but I wasn't having it. "No more lies, Linda," I said, leaning in with cold certainty. "This isn't about me anymore. This is about you and what you've done to yourself, to your family, to your reputation. I'm done protecting you." Linda's reaction was one I had expected, but it was still hard to watch. Her carefully constructed world was collapsing, and she knew it. She had always been the type to try to keep control, to paint over everything with a smile and a good excuse. But there was no excuse now. There was no way to sugarcoat it. She was exposed, and she was furious. "You think this is funny, Greg?" she shot back, her voice rising with rage. "You think this is some kind of game? You're going to ruin everything for both of us, just because you can't handle the truth." The anger in her words only made me more certain of what I had to do. There was no remorse in her tone. There was no genuine apology. It was all about her, as always. She wasn't upset because she had hurt me. She was upset because she was caught, and now she was scrambling to save face. "You don't get to decide how I feel anymore," I said, my voice low and steady. "You forfeited that right the minute you crossed that line with him. This is on you, Linda. You did this, and you're not going to just waltz your way back into my life like nothing happened." Her face twisted with frustration. "I loved you, Greg. I still love you. You can't just throw all that away." But it wasn't about love anymore. It wasn't even about trust. This was about power, and I had the upper hand now. She had destroyed everything we had, and no amount of pleading was going to fix it. The dinner was the public declaration, the moment that Linda's carefully crafted image was finally shattered. But I didn't stop there. It wasn't just her social standing that needed to be dismantled. It was her financial stability, her career, everything that had been built on the foundation of her lies. I had already contacted my lawyer and laid out a plan for the divorce. It wasn't going to be a quick and easy settlement. I wasn't going to let her walk away with a dime more than she deserved. I was going to make sure she paid for every ounce of emotional and financial damage she had caused. We started negotiating the terms. My lawyer made it clear that the affair had already impacted the terms of the divorce. Linda had spent years hiding her infidelity, and it was clear she had made a habit of lying about her finances too. The way she had been hiding money, spending it recklessly, it all added up. She wasn't going to walk away unscathed. The house, the assets, everything we had built together, these were no longer hers for the taking. I made sure the media knew about her affair too. Her social media accounts were filled with fake updates about our perfect life together, but now I was going to take those down. I was going to make sure that anyone who followed her or knew of her knew what she'd done. I wasn't going to let her control the narrative anymore. But the true blow came when I made sure she lost her job. I had already spoken to a few key people at her workplace, quietly hinting at the details of her affair and making it clear that this was no longer something that could be swept under the rug. She wasn't just facing professional fallout from the affair. She was facing a complete collapse of her career. The moment her boss called her into his office to discuss her behavior, I knew it was over. She tried to spin it, tried to talk her way out of it, but it was no use. The affair had destroyed her career. She wasn't going to be able to recover from this. In the end, Linda tried to put on a brave face, but it was clear she knew she had lost. She had no friends left. Her job was in jeopardy. She was trying to salvage her financial situation, but it was already falling apart. She came to me one last time, her face pale and drawn. "Greg, please," she said, the emotion finally breaking through. "I was wrong. I know I messed up, but you don't have to do this. Don't take everything from me. We can still fix it." But I wasn't swayed. I looked at her, and for the first time, I didn't feel any pity. I didn't feel sorry for her. "It's too late, Linda," I said, my voice cold. "You had your chances. You chose your path, and now you'll have to live with the consequences. There's nothing left to fix. I'm done." As she walked away, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. I had won, and Linda had lost everything. After everything, Linda was left to pick up the shattered pieces of her life, but there was no coming back from this. I had done what I set out to do: expose her, ruin her reputation, dismantle her career, and make sure she felt the full weight of her betrayal. And though she tried to salvage what she could, it was clear to anyone who knew her that she would never be the same. She moved out of the house, her pride as broken as her life. She had no friends left, no career to speak of, and no place in my world. The divorce went through quietly, but was far from peaceful. The financial terms were settled in my favor, leaving her with far less than she had ever expected. And as for the children, they saw what she had done. They saw their mother's lies, her betrayal, and the consequences. They made their choice clear, staying with me, cutting ties with her. In a twisted way, I felt a sense of relief. The burden of carrying on with a broken marriage was lifted, and I was able to focus on rebuilding what was truly important: my relationship with my children and my own peace of mind. One final card was left to play. A few months after the divorce, Linda came to me with one last plea. This time, there was no anger, no bitterness in her voice, just a woman broken and desperate. She stood at my doorstep, tears in her eyes, holding a letter in her hand. "Greg, I made a mistake. I see now what I've lost. You and the kids. I can't live with myself. Please, let's try again. I'll do whatever it takes. I can't fix everything, but I can try. I looked at her, empty. Linda, it's too late. You had your chances. But the real shock came when I saw what she had in her hands. A bank statement, proof of her secret savings, the money she'd hidden over the years. She had kept it for herself, thinking it was a way to secure her future while betraying me. And yet, here she was hoping I would let her back in. She hadn't learned a thing. I took the letter, read it briefly, and then ripped it up in front of her. You're too late. You don't get a second chance. Not from me. As I walked back inside, I realized something. The life she had tried to destroy, the one I had fought so hard to preserve, was now mine to live again. And for the first time in years, I was free. There's something about betrayal that changes you. It hardens you in ways you never thought possible. I used to think that love could overcome anything, that trust could be rebuilt. But not with Linda. Some things are beyond repair. It's been a long road since then, but I'm stronger. I've learned the value of self-respect and the importance of not allowing anyone, especially someone you love, to take away your dignity. If you're ever in a situation like mine, know that you don't have to accept betrayal. It doesn't matter who they are or how long you've been together. Once trust is gone, it's gone. You deserve better. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. I've moved on, I've rebuilt, and I've learned what really matters. Family, integrity, and peace of mind. The rest? It doesn't matter anymore.